Hello, my name's Anne Morrison and I'm here today on behalf of the Irish Cultural Centre in Hammersmith, London. And part of the role of the ICC is to enable Irish authors to launch and promote and to discuss their work. In autumn 2020, its first literary festival included Irish writers from all over Ireland, as well as Canada and America. Today's event is part of a shorter series concentrating on leading voices and writers from Northern Ireland. And today I'm very, very happy to be in conversation with the poet Michael Longley. Michael has been a central figure in the poetry of Northern Ireland since the 1960s and was described by Seamus Heaney as a keeper of the artistic estate, a custodian of griefs and wonders. He's the author of 11 critically acclaimed books of poetry, from No Continuing City in 1969 to his most recent publication, The Candlelight Master. He's received many awards for his work, including the Whitbread, T.S. Eliot Hawthornden prizes, the Wilfred Owen Award and the Pinter Prize. And other major achievements include the Queen's Gold Medal for Poetry, a CBE, and from 2007 to 2010, Michael was Ireland Professor of Poetry. In 2015, he was made a Free Man of the City of Belfast. He's a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and a member of Aosdána. Michael and his wife, the literary critic Edna Longley, live and work in Belfast. And Michael, you and I have been friends for many years, even decades, I would say.
Yes, goes back a long way.
A long way.
I remember you introducing yourself to me in the company of Robert, and then I forgot your name, and you said, just think of Van Morrison and remove the V. They're very strange the things you remember, isn't it?
It is. Well, we've gone on from there, and indeed you were the witness at mine and Robert's wedding and so forth. So we've known each other many years. But I was wondering, how are you doing in lockdown? Are you finding it's helping or hindering your writing at the moment?
Well, it really just augments my already hermit-like existence. And in the last year, in the last 12 months, I've written more poems than I would normally write in about 3 or 4. So it has been, mind you, Edna looks after me. I do about 1/3 of the cooking, but it has been a rich period, and I have more or less finished a new book. By the way, it's 12 titles I've published.
Okay, all right.
Well, that's quite important because the next one, the new book, will be the 13th.
All right.
I just refuse to be superstitious about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And you were saying that in lockdown, you and Edna had been getting to know each other, which for people who've been married for nearly 60 years is quite good going, I thought.
Well, I mean, she's bottomless, as we all know. I'm quite a shallow person, I think, compared to her. But no, it's what we've done a lot of talking, and it's and philosophizing, and really registering the things that matter most deeply during the crisis. And it's the worst aspect of it is not seeing our grandchildren and children, but by and large we've got by, and at a practical level, the local shops have been helpful, and they do deliveries, and the trouble is you can't check whether your oranges and lemons are as fresh as they might be if you went in and chose them yourself.
If these are our biggest problems, it's not too bad though, is it? So
no, not too bad.
I'm glad to hear that. So, you mean you've written on a tremendously wide range of subjects, but you were saying that you see yourself first and foremost as a love poet. And I'd love you to tell us about why do you think your love poetry is the heart of your work?
Well, it's very difficult to explain that. I mean, I have said before that if poetry is a wheel, the hub of that wheel is love poetry, and branching out from the love poetry are other affections and responsibilities, love of country, love of nature, love of whatever you like. And I do think as well that there's something sexy about poetry. There certainly is for me. I mean, I've said somewhere that it's far more exciting writing a poem, for me anyway, it's far more exciting than anything else, like eating or drinking or even sex, you know. And therefore, for something that is so sexually alive, the core of it is bound to be love poetry.
Absolutely. The theme about love and love poetry. I was when we were talking about this lifelong relationship almost with Edna. How important to your work has it been that Edna is this distinguished critic and academic?
Well, Edna by any count's a great critic, you know. She is certainly one of the best critics of poetry in the world. And when I've written a poem, which I did this morning, by the way, excited to be seeing you, you see. When I've written a poem, I'm not really, I don't relax until I've shown it to her. And then she gives it what I jokingly call, and which she doesn't like me to say, the good housekeeping seal of approval. And it's been extraordinary to be able to test anything I've written against this very, very subtle critical mind. One of my running gags, though, with the students is that I'm probably the only poet who's written love poems to a critic. So you see, I don't think a poem, well, I don't think any work of art is complete until it has been received critically, until it has its audience, and that its audience has thought and talked about it and felt about it.
And did she always say it's marvelous, or are you sometimes disappointed in her reaction?
Well, I expect unbridled encomium, of course.
Actually.
But really, all I'm looking for is the thumbs up.
Oh.
I know Mary was telling me that when Seamus showed her a poem, he would always nervously say, "What's wrong with it? What's wrong with it?" And that's a very important and mysterious moment when Edna says, "Should you not invert those two words? Do you need that comma there?" Just the little tweakings, which would have happened anyway, but she saves me weeks of anxious fiddling. I don't think any poem is a solo flight. I think if one was cast up on a desert island on one's own, say at the age of 12, one wouldn't necessarily start to write poetry. You would set out to be a builder of shelters, a catcher of fish. But so what was I saying?
We were on the subject.
Oh yeah, about poetry.
Yes.
Yeah.
And love poetry in particular. When you were saying about the sex and love and the importance of that to your work, there's a tremendous love poem which it'd be great if you could read for us, which is Swan's Mating.
Yeah, that was written. It's set on the Dublin Canal, and I remember one Sunday walking along the canal, sitting down, and these two swans came, and they proceeded to mate, and it's very, they do this with their heads, and it's very, very balletic. It really demands the music of Tchaikovsky. And then eventually the cob puts his neck over the pen, and then when he treads her, and she's submerged at the moment of ignition, if you like. And it's very, very, it's stunning. It's very beautiful. So I'll read this one. I wrote this one very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
The second stanza came as I was walking down the stairs, and I just wrote it out. The first stanza, which is simpler in a way, was harder to write. And I love the two words in English for the male swan, which is cob, and for the female, which is pen. Swans mating. Even now, I wish that you had been there, sitting beside me on the river bank, the cob and his pen sailing in rhythm until their small heads met and the final heraldic moment dissolved in ripples. This was a marriage and a baptism, a holding of breath, nearly a drowning. Wings spread wide for balance where he trod, her feathers full of water, and her neck under the water like a bar of light. You like that one?
Yeah, it's gorgeous, absolutely. And really,
I've been obsessed by swans ever since.
Well, birds feature a lot, don't they, in your work? They're and nature generally.
Yeah, I don't mind being called a nature poet. And the next book, my next book, my 13th book, it's full of dozens of birds. In fact, it's called the book. Do you want the title of the book?
Yes, please.
The Slain Birds, and it comes from a genius line by Dylan Thomas, for the sake of the souls of the slain birds flying. Mm. And so it's called The Slain Birds, and there are all sorts of lovely little creatures in it. And I'm just going to have a glass of water.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That's the distinguished critic.
It's also handy for passing you glasses of water.
But she subs occasionally as my PA.
I'm sure she loves you saying that.
And she subs as my stylist.
Really? She's multitasking today.
I wouldn't be wearing this shirt and braces if it weren't for it.
Well, much credit to her, much credit to her. But I think let's pursue one of those spokes of the wheel then, with love as the hub, and pursue the idea of nature in your poetry, because the landscape and the flora and fauna of Corrig Sciwan on the west coast of Ireland have been a tremendous thread through a lot of your poetry. Can you sort of say what that place means to you?
Well, I remember it was in 1970. And we went there for the first time. Edna and I, we were collected by David. Well, first of all, the cottage is owned by a very great ornithologist, David Cabot, and he's let us lodge there every year while he's not there. And it was his wife who collected. It was an old school friend of Edna's, and she collected us, and she drove us from Lewisburg to Corrig Sciwan, and we just had one child there, a baby, Becky, and she stopped the car at the turn in the road when you come down, and there's this wonderful sandy arena with and out there's Clare Island, Inishturk, Inishboffin, and to the left there's Wheelray Mountain. It's breathtaking, and in a way that's how you respond to it for a while, but as you get to know it, you're aware of the riches in the middle distance, and then finally you come to appreciate everything that's at your feet. And I've been back there every year since 1970. You know that saying, travel broadens the mind. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably true, but I think going back to the same place again and again, a place of such abundant beauty, enriches the mind. And every year, and I think, well, I won't be writing any more Corrig Sciwan poems, but every year there's a few. In other words, the place is bottomless. And at this stage, having been there for God knows how many years, 50 years in a row, I feel that I'm still only scratching the surface.
Yes, that's amazing.
Uh,
And so many of the animals, the birds of that place enter into your poetry, and I'm always particularly struck by the otters. And I mean, how do you feel when you see an otter up close, when you have one of those encounters?
Well, I feel devout. I mean, I revere these creatures, and I think I used to think of myself as their custodian. Do you know what I mean? That David Cabot and I and Edna and our family, we all love these creatures so much that we're their custodians. But I now think of them as the custodians of our soul, of our souls. Um, I, for me, when I see a beautiful bird in flight, or I see, say, a gannet diving for a fish, or the swans on the lake taking off in flight, or a rare orchid. It's like a religious experience. It's certainly the nearest I get to what I might call a religious experience.
Because you're
And
not conventionally religious, so in a way, this is where your spiritual feeling is, really.
no, I don't think you need to believe anything though to be religious. Uh, I think I wouldn't mind using the adjective religious to describe my feelings when I see these wonders, and when I meet an otter. I haven't seen an otter for a few years. Uh, they're there, of course, because we see their tracks on on the sand, and in a way, Corrigskeewan and the west of Ireland. I'm also very fond of the Burren in County Clare. In a way, they've become states of mind.
Mm.
And I think if I were confined to a wheelchair and couldn't go there anymore, I would still be writing Corrigskeewan poems,
Mm.
because I've used the word to describe a soul landscape.
Mm.
It's a soul landscape, and the sort of thing that moves me is just the light you get off the waves when there's spindrift there, when they've been stirred up by the wind, or the call of the curlew, which is a very plaintive call. When I have so many favorites, and anyway, there you are.
I mean, with you, some people think of nature poetry as being a form of escapism, but it doesn't really form that function with you, I don't think. It's not so much a retreat from the problems of Northern Ireland as a sort of more bleak way of looking at them, in a way. Do you feel that?
Well, through the Troubles, Corrigskeewan shone its beautiful light on the Troubles, and helped to light up the corners. But I mean, our problems are much bigger than Northern Ireland. They're now global, and if we don't get our act together, we've had it. And I think that really what the world needs is to read more nature poetry. And I mean, how we care for the animals and the plants which share the planet with us. That's the most political question, the most pressing question there is. And anything which helps to burnish the appreciation of other people, of us all, to the animals and the plants, is of crucial importance.
Absolutely. And these places that you've been going, well, Corrigskeewan, I mean, more recently, Loch Alsh, with where Sarah, your daughter, lives there, they kind of form this kind of iconography, personal iconography. And there are these recurring settings and allusions and references in your work. Are they self-consciously constructed, or are they just the natural outcome of your long-term interests and connection with these themes and places?
Well, I've never ever constructed anything. Poems come to me in confusion, and I have to work them out. And I'm taken by surprise by poems. I can't plan. You can't plan a poem. You can't produce a poem as a result of willpower. It really has to come out. And in one of the great honors of Edna's and my life together was introducing each of the three children to Corrigskeewan, and it changed their lives. They're now all grown up, of course, and we now have 7 grandchildren, and they all love Corrigskeewan. So it's
and the grandchildren feature quite a lot, particularly in your recent work, and I would say that they're another sort of spoke of that hub, that wheel that connects back to love.
Well, they are indeed. It's quite extraordinary to have 7 grandchildren. I'm Papa, you say, I'm called Papa. And I said to Edna, that's like being promoted for doing nothing. And the new book, The Slain Birds, well, a dozen or more poems about my grandchildren. And see, it seems to me that there aren't many grandchildren poems, are there? And it's because most poets don't live to be old farts like me. Yeah.
Well, even more important to write about your grandchildren, but it's that quality of them being able to see familiar things through new eyes, I think, that you really bring out in the poems you've written about them.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I listen to everything they say. For instance, the new book will have as a little epigraph at the end, a little poem in italics on its own, something which just takes down what Connor, who's Connor Michael Longley is named for me. He just said in conversation a few years back, he said, the dark is where you can see what you're thinking.
Ooh.
Isn't that wonderful?
That's deep, isn't it?
It is terribly good. And Loch Alsh was important. You see, I shared my soul landscape, Corrigskeewan, with Sarah all through those years. And now that she's living with her partner and 2 daughters in Loch Alsh in the Western Highlands, she's introduced me to the salt marsh of Loch Alsh and the surrounding hills, and the 2 landscapes, the 2 soul landscapes, are interacting, are refracting each other, and there's something very, very profound happening in my relationship with those 2 places, and more especially with Sarah.
And staying with family, but a different aspect, I'm going to ask you about your father, who also appears frequently in your poems and some of your best work as well. He was in the trenches as a captain of a company in the First World War and received the Military Cross, and also volunteered in World War II. But in what way has his presence kind of lingered in your life, and particularly when you reflect on more recent conflicts?
Well, I had a tumultuous adolescence with him, which I regret really, because he was ill towards the end of his life, and when I was in my teens, and I think more and more of him really. I mean, I've lived God knows how many years longer than he did. He was 64 when he died, and I was just I was just 20. And I kicked myself practically every day for not having asked him more questions about his experiences in the trenches, because like a lot of survivors, he was reticent about that extraordinary nightmare, which I think Europe is still recovering from, really. And but he was, in retrospect, I see him as an extraordinarily gentle man, and he was rather charming. And unlike most English people in Ulster, we Ulster people, Ulster people seem to like him a lot, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And he joined up. I remember it was at Notting Hill Gate in London. He joined up when he was about 17. Can you imagine? And then by the time he was 20, he was a captain, because there were the officer class was so decimated. He was called, the snobs of the British Army would have called him a trench officer.
Okay.
He was there because he was needed in the trenches, not because he'd been to Sandhurst or Eton. It's all fairly loathsome, that aspect of British society.
Sobering.
And I mean, the fact that he was in charge of a company of young soldiers. Can you imagine?
At 20,
when he was half the age of my son. So he haunts me, and the war haunts me.
So he died when you were only 20, your father, but you've continued to write about him. And has the way you think of him changed over the years? It sort of sounds like it has.
Yes, it's been much tender. I get more and more tender towards him. I mean, when I look in the mirror, I see his face, and I regret very much that he never met Edna, and he never met our children or grandchildren. And I can see that he knew. What I liked about him was he was gentle and very, very well mannered, in a very English way. Although I'm Irish, I always cheer for Ireland, and I love it, especially when they beat England. I'm still an Anglophile, and I like to remember the sound of his voice, which was it was slightly posh. I don't know where he got it from. He should have had a Cockney accent, but he had quite a posh accent, as indeed did my mother, who also came from South London. And I love. Yeah, he was. You always had a hanky in his breast pocket, you know, and a cravat for gardening, even when he was just
for gardening,
even when he was weeding. Yeah, and yeah.
And what was his attitude towards your poetry? Was he encouraging of that?
No, I'm afraid he was discouraging. My very first poem was called Marigolds, and appeared in the Icarus, which was the Trinity College undergraduate literary magazine, and it was called Marigolds. And it went, she gave him marigolds, the colour of autumn, to keep in his cold room, and the late light of autumn gilded all their moments. Now, I know it's not Paradise Lost, but I brought it home by mistake at Easter, and my father discovered it, and he said, "It's not worth the paper it's written on."
Oh no.
And yeah, but that, in a way, you see, because of the mood I was in my teens, that made me all the more determined to pursue poetry.
You never doubted yourself, or it didn't knock your confidence?
Oh no, you don't. I doubt myself all the time, and it's terribly easy for my confidence to be knocked. No, I think praise is well, we're biological beings who respond to stimuli, and one of the stimuli for me, I'm afraid, is praise. I can't get enough of it, and when I get it, I inhale very, very deeply.
Why
Yeah,
not? Well, you've had a lot of it, so you should you
but
should be quite satisfied. But it's
yeah,
probably,
well,
yeah.
one of the, I'm sorry in a way that my father didn't live long enough to see something of the poetic, the way things came to fruition.
Mm.
And I remember when when I received the Queen's Gold Medal, and I got on rather well with her. I chatted away, um, and I said I showed her a photograph of my father. I brought up a few photographs of him. They're up on the wall here, in fact, of him receiving the military cross and something else from George V. And I said, "Ma'am," you say, "Ma'am, may I show you a couple of photographs of my father with my father with your grandfather?" That's right. And she looked at them. She was interested. And I said, "May I ask where that was taken?" And she said, "Oh, I know exactly the spot. And I will get my equerry to see you there." And you could see from the balustrade where the photograph was taken.
Mm.
So I bowed out backwards. And the equerry took me, and I stood on the spot where my father had received his military cross, and I had burning in my pocket the Queen's Gold Medal for poetry. And I remember thinking to myself then that Marigolds wasn't such a crappy poem after all.
Very good, absolutely. No, he would have been very proud, wouldn't he? But he unfortunately died when you were too young to have had all that success. But it's
Yeah,
all happened since.
yeah,
Have
yeah.
you've forgiven him that remark? I hope anyway.
Oh, forgave him when soon after he'd made it. And I knew it was just kind of impatient.
Mm.
And he was, in many ways, military. He really had been shaped by his experience. And I think my father felt that all I needed spiritually was what he would have called a short back and sides haircut and to button my shirt and wear a tie.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
maybe the cravat and yeah, the
Oh,
hanky in
yeah.
the pocket as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh. Well, let's move on, if we may, to the Troubles and all those cataclysmic events that happened over many decades in the north of Ireland. And you've written many incredibly powerful poems about the Troubles, but also talked about the difficulties of writing about it. And I mean, how difficult was it to find the appropriate tone and form of expression for all of those terrible things that we lived through?
Well, it's terribly difficult because you're talking about a civil war, and you're talking about the suffering of your neighbours and fellow citizens, and one's got to. I mean, it was John Hewitt, not John Hewitt, John Hume, who referred to the politics of the latest atrocity, and I adopted that at the time to the poetry of the latest atrocity. And there was a mode of writing which I and my friends all dismissed as Troubles trash, and it was cashing in on the lurid and distressing details. And it, for quite a while after '69, I mean, it all blew up, didn't it? In the summer of '69. I remember Derek Mahon and I walking up the Falls Road, which was in ruins in many places. The really we felt that we needed time. That, as I expressed it somewhere, we needed time for the raw experience to settle to an imaginative depth where it could be transmuted into something that was artistically and spiritually authentic. And eventually, though, the poems emerged from Derek and Seamus and Jimmy Simmons and me, and from the younger poets. And um, some of mine did have made a small contribution, I like to think. There's a poem called Wounds, in which what I do really, Anne, is I asked the ghost of my father what he would make of the mess of the troubles. And then when there was talk of a ceasefire, I found myself writing a Homeric poem called Ceasefire.
Is that one you could read for us?
You think I should?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, this is my Lake Isle of Innisfree, you know what I mean? This is the only poem of mine which most people have heard of, which anybody's heard of, you know. And this was, when I was writing this poem, it describes the old king of Troy, Priam, plucking up courage to go to Achilles' tent to beg for the body of his son Hector, whom Achilles has killed in combat and has been dragging around Troy behind his chariot. And that's really what the poem is about. And at the time, I needed to put a face on Priam. For me, this is the soul, and I think begin with the Iliad's the greatest poem we have about war and death, and this episode between Priam and Achilles when they meet, for me, is the soul of the Iliad. And I gave Priam the face of Gordon Wilson in my mind, you know, the draper who lay beside his daughter when the Enniskillen bomb and they were covered in rubble, and he felt her dying beside him. And he was on TV a few days later with in plaster on his face and his arm in a sling. And he said he forgave her killers. It was an extraordinary moment, you know. And this all went into this poem, which emerged, was published in the Irish Times. I sent it down to the Irish Times, and John Banville, the great novelist, was then literary critic, and he shouted, "Stop press." And it went in, and that week, the IRA declared their ceasefire in August 94.
Yeah. So maybe you'd read it for us now.
That ceasefire. Put in mind of his own father and moved to tears, Achilles took him by the hand and pushed the old king gently away. But Priam curled up at his feet and wept with him until their sadness filled the building. Taking Hector's corpse into his own hands, Achilles made sure it was washed, and for the old king's sake, laid out in uniform, ready for Priam to carry, wrapped like a present, home to Troy at daybreak. When they had eaten together, it pleased them both to stare at each other's beauty as lovers might. Achilles built like a god, Priam good-looking still and full of conversation, who earlier had sighed, "I get down on my knees and do what must be done, and kiss Achilles' hand, the killer of my son."
Yeah. Wow. So powerful.
Yeah, it's Homer enabled me to write that, you know.
I mean, the powerful presence of Homer and then Ovid and so on are there through a lot of your poetry. You studied classics at Trinity, as you're saying. I mean, these poems, well, in the case of Homer, 3 millennia old. You know, what do you feel is their kind of continuing relevance to the modern world? I know you're a great advocate of them.
Well, they provide a lens through which to view everything. I mean, Homer and the great Greek tragedians are about everything that troubles and concerns us. They're more relevant than ever. They never they never go out of date. I mean, Homer's never gone out of date, has he? You know, I mean, T.S. Eliot may go out of date, but Homer certainly won't. You know,
Yeah.
And they provide models really for us to make sense of our confusions.
I want to take you back to you know, when you sort of the start of your writing career, and you know, when you began, why was it, do you think, that you were drawn to poetry rather than prose?
That's a very good question. I tell the students occasionally, you know, in the Heaney Centre, you know, the creative writers, I tell them, with trying not to smile, I say, well, of course, prose is for sissies. And well, the thing about poetry, well, Yeats's phrase, the fascination of what's difficult, and you know, pushing against the medium. And I remember in a class on Aristotle at Trinity, the great scholar and Professor W.B. Stanford, who was talking to us about Aristotle, and he asked us the following week to come back with our own definition of poetry. And I'm still proud of mine, although I was only, say, 20 or something. I said, if prose is a river, poetry is a fountain.
Uh-huh.
You know, the form of the poem is like the nozzle through which water is forced, and it comes out. And it's two things. It's free flowing, and it's got a pattern. So that's the way I express myself. You see, a poem comes out, it can come out, you know, but like a Rubik cube. It goes clickety, clickety, click, and you know it's finished.
Right.
Whereas prose isn't like that. You can fiddle with it forever. And nevertheless, I do feel that, say, there's not that much poetry in a lot of poetry books, right? There's more poetry in, say, a novel by John McGahern or John Banville or Sebastian Barry, you know, those. So there's an overlap between good poetry and good prose. And what they have in common is rhythm, vitality of rhythm. But
and you set yourself some quite difficult challenges, particularly in your early writing and in No Continuing City. It seems to me, in those kinds of rhythms and meter and form, you know, is a very ambitious, auspicious first book from that point of view.
Yes, I'm so proud of it, Anne. You know, and I really made things difficult for myself.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I read so much poetry now, it's just pocket prose. Do you know what I mean by that? It's well, if it was read aloud, you wouldn't know where the lines ended. The way you always do in Shakespeare, for instance, and it flows, and yet you know, you have a sense of the lines. In fact, Shakespeare is a perfect fountain. So I enjoy writing the odd bit of prose. I signed a contract many moons ago to write a memoir.
Okay.
But I haven't gotten around to it for the simple reason that I don't want prose to cancel out even one poem.
Okay.
So,
and you think it might?
Yeah. You see, the difference between poetry, how many novels have you read twice?
Not many.
Now, there are all of my favorite poems by other people, I mean. I've read hundreds of times. And, you know, a poet like Edward Thomas or W.B. Yeats, I've read their poems hundreds of times, and each time it's new. And that's the magic of poetry. And I forget who said it's memorable speech. And I mean, it's odd to have words floating around in your. It's almost the only art form that I can think of that works that way. I tell my students it's as though you could walk into an art gallery and say, "Oh, look at that Vermeer! I'll take it home." If only. And well, you can do that with poetry, can't you?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's very
And
true.
see, but poetry is a religious experience, reading it and writing it. And I said somewhere that if I knew where poetry came from, I would go there. But I don't know where it comes from. And it was 10 years in my 40s when I didn't write anything. I thought I was finished. And then the muse came back, and here I am at 81, scribbling away and writing on the morning. I think it was an anticipation of meeting you, Anne.
Oh,
Yeah, certainly.
you're a charmer. I think it's brilliant that you're having this kind of great flourishing, that your energy is undiminished.
Hasn't been published yet. It may not be seen. We've seen the old idiot making a complete asshole of himself.
I've had a sneak preview, as you know, and I am confident that is not the case.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, you were mentioning earlier about your friendships, these crucial friendships that you've had, and you shared a flat in Dublin with Derek Mann, and then you came back to Belfast and met Seamus Heaney, Jimmy Simmons. I mean, it was a most extraordinary time in that kind of 60s with such great writers all together. Do you think it was just luck that there were so many incredibly talented poets in the same place at the same time, or were you actually sparking off each other?
I think it's both those things. On American radio, I was asked why so many poets came from Northern Ireland. So I thought it'd be funny. And I said, well, it's to do with the water supply. It comes from a place called the Silent Valley. But it didn't get a titter, they take their poetry very seriously over there. But you see, when it was, especially with Derek and then with Seamus, and then with Seamus and Derek and then Muldoon, and Kieran Carson, Maeve McGuckian, it is quite extraordinary. I mean, it's a really good water polo team, isn't it? And there was a mixture of support and competition. And I like to think of, when we were together, there was a kind of convection current which lifted us up. And the first poem in my first book, Epithalamion, these are the small hours when moths by their fatal appetite that brings them tapping to get in, are steered along the night to where our window catches light. I wrote that because Mahan had sent me a poem with a tight little rhyming stanza scheme like that. So I thought I would do one and make it even more difficult than his. So it was partly a test of my virility. But lo and behold, the poem took over. And I can remember writing it down the Lisburn Road in 1963, 64, perhaps 64, 3 or 4. And the rhyme words just dancing down the page before I'd even written the poem. It was wonderful. And like when, the second stanza of the Swan's Meeting poem, which I read, when that just bang came into my head. I mean, these are the things which you just can't legislate for. You can just hope that they happen occasionally. And where were we? Sorry, Anne.
No, on the friendships, and I was sort of interested in that combination of supportive friendship, but also rivalry, because you have a You have a great poem in bookshops in Angel Hill about you putting your slim volume in front of the others, which I really like. So there was definitely an element of wanting to outdo each other as well, which was probably quite a spur to great writing.
Yes, I can remember Seamus Heaney inviting me to coffee in a little coffee shop downtown called the Piccolo. And the sole purpose of inviting me out was to buy me coffee and then tell me that he'd had a poem accepted by Encounter magazine. So, yeah.
You were duly impressed, I'm sure. Yes. Very good.
Well, I immediately sent off a poem of mine, which and I remember it was called A Working Holiday, and it got accepted. So that was the type of thing, you know.
Yeah.
But it's odd how nothing like that matters now.
Quite.
In fact, I don't send poems off. I wait to be asked, which means not very often.
I was going to say, you've reached that level now where they write to you. So, I mean, you know, we've sadly in the last few years, we've lost, you know, Kieran Carson, Derek Mahon, Seamus Heaney before that. So these great friendships that you're talking about, you know, have gone. What kind of effect has that had on you?
Well, each one of those deaths was heartbreaking, really. I miss them. I miss them very, very much. I always was very close to Mahan, and we had over 50 years friendship. So in a way, the friendship looked after itself. There was a period with Seamus when I didn't see so much of him, because I mean he really worked himself too hard. He couldn't say no. He always said yes and obliged and performed. But towards the end of his life, he and I were coming together more closely again. In fact, just a fortnight before he died in Liston, Varna, we gave a joint reading together, and we had too much to drink in the local hotel, and then in 2 weeks' time he was dead. And yeah, he's still competing from the grave. Yeah, I think if feeling giving me a nudge and saying, you know, do better than that. You know, when was the last time you had a poem in the New Statesman? Derek was more removed from the poetry business, as you might call it, and you know, a more jaundiced view of success and so forth, and protected himself. Man, he wrote a funny little poem that I occasionally think of. You know, he pretended not to be as interested as in fact he was. I built my house in the forest, far from the venal roar. Somebody please beat a path to my door.
That's so good, isn't it? Yeah.
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 Derek was one of the funniest people I've ever met.
I mean, with we were talking about Derek Mahon and Seamus Heaney and Kieran Carson having died and so on. There's in your recent work, I would say there's a definite sense of a ticking clock. And I was wondering if you have this sense of time running out and an urgency about the writing that you're doing, because you're saying you're writing a lot at the moment.
No, I don't think it's because of that sense of urgency. Again, you see, I have to be insouciant. Right. I have to believe that I'm going to live forever. Who was it said, if your right hand knows what your left hand, or the other way around, is that your left hand knows? And I think that applies to writing. And a poem comes in a kind of a blur of confusion and frustration, and its birth is a mystery. and it can't, as I said earlier, be the result of will. It's well, I don't know, as I said, the newer poems come from, and go there. But when I write a poem, it's its own excitement. I'm not thinking, oh, that's one more in the kitty against when I die, or I'm writing this because I'm frightened of death. No, I'm writing the poem because I'm in love with the words, and there's a strange feeling. A poem sort of begins out there, behind your ear. And if you focus, the thing of what I don't quite like about the creative writing notion, if I focus too much on a poem, it disappears. You have to sort of let it creep up on you and take you by surprise. And my God, if you're not surprised, nobody else is going to be surprised.
And you were saying that you're working on this new collection of the slain birds. When might we expect to be able to see that come out?
I haven't thought of that yet. I would send it off in about a year, I guess, or less than a year, and then it'll take a year, and then I might get down to write my memoir, in which you must all look out.
Definitely. Well, it's scaring me already. Absolutely, the idea of that. The other thing I should just mention is that the ICC is partnering with No Alibis bookshop in Belfast for this event. So if you would like to buy one of Michael's recent books at a discount, maybe even get your hands on a signed copy, please visit the ICC website for further details. So I would say you've kind of now reached the status of a kind of national treasure in Ireland. When you think back on this kind of extraordinary kind of poetic career, do you have a sense of what you would like your legacy to be?
I would like a few poems to be read, a few of my poems to last. That I don't think in terms of legacy, really. I would like there to leave behind reverence for form and for shape, the mystery of form. I would like to leave behind a few fountains, and that would do me fine. And it would be nice. If my work was kept in print. But I don't think in terms of, I don't really like collected poems, the volumes. But most of them could be cut by about that much. It's just a few. I forget what book it was. I wrote a one-line poem.
Yeah, shorter than a haiku, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I called it a low-ku. Yeah. It's my lost lamb, lovelier than all the wool.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask you to finish our session just with reading maybe a slightly longer poem than that. One from the Slain Birds, which is yet to be published. So we're getting a bit of a sneak preview. And I wondered if you would read us Solomon's Seal.
Yes, it's a lovely flower, which I discovered in the back garden, a bit like Lily of the Valley. And it quotes from the Song of Songs, Solomon's erotic words. Shaded by the self-seeded hazels in a back corner of our garden, to the right of the flowering currant, an unexpected Solomon's seal I want to show you. Does it matter why such graceful bells are so cold? Seals of a medieval document. It's May, and Solomon says, rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away. Winter is past, the rain is over and gone. Flowers appear on the earth. A solitary cowslip has survived under our beech, the first grass cutting. The time of the singing of birds is come.
Oh, wonderful. That's such a positive and optimistic note to end on. I think we're all feeling like that solitary flower that's managing to survive the winter, the end of lockdown and the coming of spring. So thank you so much, Michael. It's been just a total pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for, a brilliant talk. We're really grateful. Thank you so much.
And it's lovely to be talking with you. We can do this again another time, can't we?
We could do it just anyway, couldn't we? We don't even have to record it.
Well, thank you very much for your attentiveness and affection. Much appreciated.
Affection's always there. It's a real joy to talk to you, and thank you, Michael. Bye.
Okay, love. Bye-bye.